Alright, I'm just about ready to go here. I'm ConX5 here with Neo once again. What's up, Neo?
Hello, hello. How you doing, man?
Not too bad. For anyone who's listening or anyone who's going to listen, this is just going to be our first little sort of preview show, I guess, for the upcoming MLUT Season 4 here. Matches haven't started yet. We'll go over the schedules and all that are in a bit. But what's going to happen is you're basically just going to have your matches split up into a week. We've got 7 teams, so every team's going to play each other once in round-robin style. It'll be points-based. And first week's going to be coming up soon. We already have those schedules posted. So, let's see. What do we got going on here? Looks like the way scheduling is going to work here. We'll go ahead and cover that real quickly. Basically, you have the week's going to start on Sunday and the next Saturday. So you have any time within that week to play your first matches. So this weekend we should see some of our first matches played, although it wouldn't surprise me to see some of them get put off a little bit, just to see some of these captains try to get a better look at their rosters, no?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Some people are going to be, having scheduling problems and whatnot. I'll bet that this first week goes longer, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, from the sounds of Linoleum, what Linoleum's been telling me, it sounds like they're going to be a little bit sort of lenient with this. We're just going to mainly try to focus on just getting these matches played first and foremost.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there is, that we just get more played than not, so we don't have an MLUT that ends up dying.
Always a plus on that. Let me go ahead and add us a little bit of background here. There we go. Alright, so move up, boom, done. Alright, so let's go ahead and move down this list here. Bunch of the preliminaries, kind of stuff you need to cover in a previous show. We got the schedules talked about. There have been a couple changes to the map list. I'm actually going to bring in Facial, one of our captains, in here to give us a little bit of an opinion on what we're looking at here. Actually, no, he's going to go let his dog out real quick. Alright, well, let's go over some of the player changes. We can go ahead and cover that first. First free agent move already made. Zeos, you saw dropping Banco for Sonic, the UT1 Sonic, UT99 Sonic. Not the European Sonic, who was drafted, I believe, by Facial. So, yeah, from what Zeo said, it sounds like he thinks he's going to get a little bit more activity out of Sonic. I don't have no experience with this. Do you know that Sonic from UT99 at all?
I'm not familiar. I definitely think that it's a smart move, though, because I only really saw Banco play in one pickup game. So I think it's smart if, somebody that hasn't been around, just to pick somebody else up to bolster your roster a little bit, and I think that's kind of his thinking on that.
Yeah, I think on draft night it actually had Banco listed as one of my sort of sleeper picks, simply because I saw him play and he was surprisingly, a surprisingly adequate player for his price tag, but once again, we keep talking about these draft leagues. It's not necessarily who has the best team on paper. A lot of times it comes down to activity, who's around, and of course a lot of chemistry comes into play. And I mean, I think we saw a lot of players either get passed over early or just get passed over completely because of those concerns over activity.
Yeah, definitely. Although it is interesting because even though he did pick up the other Sonic, it's not even that I've seen him play in a pug either. So we'll see. Maybe he's been talking to him and he knows he'll be around.
Yeah, it's like we said on draft night, a lot of these captains have been running around trying to talk to people, trying to find out what the likelihood is of people coming back. I think we saw Linoleum making draft night Facebook messages to send out to people like Casual to try to get hold of people at the last minute to find out, what were the odds of them being able to get them to play. And of course, the trick of the whole trick of it isn't just getting someone to show up for one night; it's being able to get them to show up for the whole season, right?
Yeah, and actually, interestingly enough, on that, he messaged Casual, and he actually played in a pickup game that very night, and played pretty well. I played on their team. Still has those Pistons down, so he was one of my sleepers, and I think if he is even a little bit active and comes back and practices some, he's going to be a good addition to Linoleum's team.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many of these names come out of the woodwork and how many that we expected to be active maybe drop out a little bit. Speaking of that, as far as I'm aware, we still have an outgoing trade request going on for Marcos. Last time I heard, he was trying to trade Corp for Dre from Bob's team. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't heard much about it. It's kind of interesting. I don't know how what Bob's going to do, if he's going to take this or not, but it's interesting to me because if Corp is going to have scheduling problems, then and I see Dre is active as far as I know. It'd be interesting to see if he would take that trade or not, because what does that really do for Bob's team? So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Maybe Bob will take it. Corp, I think, maybe is a little bit better player. They're both defensive players as far as I know. But if Bob can get Corp on a good schedule, then it could be a good trade for both sides. So.
Well, I do know that Bob's team, as we noted in the draft, is very frag heavy and very defensive heavy. Corp is another one of those fragger type players, but I know he has a little bit more offensive experience than Dre. Not a ton, but I've seen him play offense in pickup games, so he has at least a little bit of experience. Maybe that's one angle Bob might look at it, is say, hey, there's another player that's at least a little more versatile we can throw on the other side of the map here. Just kind of prognosticating here, but that's maybe one possibility we could see.
Yeah, that's a very good point. To that, Dre, I've never seen him play offense a single game. So, and I definitely have seen Corp, run some flags and be some offensive cover. So that is a good point there.
Yes, we talk about that. Might as well bring in Facial here because that segues beautifully into this. All right, now we have Facial joining us, one of these captains, and we were going to talk about maps. We're going to get to that in a second. First, we just talked about this, and you actually talked about it in your write-up a little bit. Players that can play both sides of the map, that is offense and defense, or at the very least play multiple roles. I noted it on the draft night. I think your team probably has the most versatile lineup as far as people that can play in multiple levels of that offense or defense role, that is being anchors on the flag all the way up to covering your offense, maybe playing mid, and sometimes even multiple people that can run the flag. How important do you think that is in a draft league like this, where a lot of times fielding the consistent five is a problem?
I'd like to think it's a big it's a big bonus for any team that can do something like that. I mean, you've got teams who are very one-sided, as you were saying earlier. Bob's team, on paper at least, is a very frag-heavy team that could potentially be given fits when they go up against another potentially frag-heavy team, or a team that's really solid on defense, where you pick a team that has the versatility to put maybe any two guys back on flagstick, or you have the ability to maybe rotate guys in the middle of a map. Let's say you're after a long standoff and a flag gets returned and you cap, maybe one of your defensive guys is still on their base. He could grab, and any of your guys, if you have a versatile lineup, could easily stick around and hold down that base while that other defenseman's doing a quick run.
Yeah. That's the sort of the two different angles here. The one is the simple one, which is sometimes not every team can really count on having their five starting lineup players through the entire season. I think that's one of the aspects of draft leagues that people overlook sometimes, is the longevity of a team. You can get people to show up together on the same night, the same time. Most of the time, maybe if you're a good captain, you get a little bit lucky. Maybe you're 6th, 7th guy, but every once in a while, you're going to have those times where you're just going to have to say, "Hey, look, in order to not get a forfeit, we've got to plug in some other guys." And I think that's where the bottom half, so to speak, of these draft lineups come into play. And I think having more versatility to plug and play and say, "Okay, we can shift this guy, say, from defense to offense, and don't feel like we're going to lose much," I think can really play a big role. Obviously, it depends on the availability of everyone else and whether other people have to sort of take a hit in that regard, but that's where I think your team is uniquely positioned, at least in this one.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, any time that you have, like you said, a draft league that's going to span out over 6 weeks, a lot of things can happen in a 6-week period. I mean, any one night, maybe we have something planned, something could happen to any of those players, and not only do you need your roster to be deep, but you also need it to be flexible and versatile, and that was, those were two of the main points that I was looking for in players when I drafted.
Yeah, and to that point, as Poison Bagels pointed out on the Pro and Real forums, there really are only two teams that, and I agree with them, that have 5 to 6 players that not only are extremely active, playing on a lot of pickup games, but that aren't necessarily rusty and aren't trying to shake off the rust right now coming back to the game. And those two teams are Facial's team and Linoleum's team. They have rosters of 8, and they both those teams have 5 to 6 players that are extremely active and not shaking rust off. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a situation like that, anytime you have a draft league situation like this, you're going to have those different player or team dynamics with different players and different levels of rust and be it experience or activity, and you have to weigh all those when you're drafting them. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The other aspect, Facial, I got to ask you this because you're the team that's in the best position to do this. You've sort of had this throughout the years, this concept of the true revolving offense, where you basically rotate your defensive and offensive players constantly, and you maybe put two defenders up, two attackers. When your two attackers die, your two defenders immediately take on an attacking role. You think we're going to see any of that out of your team? Maybe try to get a little cheeky this season?
It's definitely possible. I won't rule it out. I mean, given the map and given the matchup against an opposing team, it's something that could very well happen. I like to think that that the majority of our players on our team are very progressive thinking and are always up for trying new strategies and like to kind of keep it fresh, so to say. So I definitely won't rule it out, but I can't say for sure that will happen.
Well, it's one of those things you have to have a very specific lineup to be able to pull something like that off, and not just be completely throwing the match. But who knows? Maybe going into the final weeks, you guys will have enough of a lead that you can try something crazy like that.
Yeah, I mean that would always be the goal, obviously, to come into one of the final weeks in a comfortable position. So hopefully, if we're in something like that, maybe we can put on some sort of a game like that and just have a lot of fun with it.
Just go 5 offense flying V formation and just quack your way back and forth across the map.
Knuckle pucks from mid, buddy.
All right, well, moving on. I mean, this is why we actually wanted to bring you in here. So we wanted to get your opinions on, again, covering the preliminaries as we go into this league. One of the big changes was the map list got adjusted. I think it's one that most people would more or less agree with, and it's definitely meant to cater to a lot more of the older players coming back, and as well as to the North American crowd versus the European crowd, as far as what maps were changed here. I mean, first of all, we had Campers Crossing, which was basically added to the list. As I understand it, was basically added to the list to try to entice more European players, to give them a map that they were a little more familiar with. But that didn't seem to have made much of a difference in the signups, did it?
No, I don't feel like it really did. I mean, there was only maybe a handful of the European players, and I think a lot of them were staples of the 2K4 CTF community beforehand. So I really don't think the addition of that map really boosted those signups at all. But I will say, speaking to that point, that I actually do really like Campers Crossing as a map, and I'm kind of disappointed to see it removed.
And yeah, I'll go out there and say I agree with Facial. I actually think it's a really good map. Definitely hasn't been played at all that I've seen since I've been back to the game for 8 months now or so. But back in the day, maybe 8 years ago or so, it was actually played quite a bit, and it's a really good map. But it definitely was more popular in the European scene, even than in the U.S. ever, probably. So.
Yeah, well, there was one more change that was made that we need to talk about a little bit, and that would be Protrest being taken off the map list. Now, as far as I'm aware, like most of the feedback I've heard about this map has been generally positive. However, I know since I've come back, I hadn't personally played it at all, and I hadn't seen it played. I don't know how often it may have been played on the whole. Maybe I missed a little bit. What do you guys think about that map and it being taken off the list?
I like that it's off the list. I'll go ahead and say that first. I don't think that it's a bad map per se. I think it's a great map to go out and have fun on. Maybe throw into a pug for, like I said, for the sake of fun. It'd be a really good public map if there were any public servers still out there. I just don't think it has a very coordinated feel in the sense of a team dynamic game. It just seems very spammy and kind of just all over the place, really. There's not a very good flow to the map, if you ask me.
Yeah, so I'll go out there and I'll agree and disagree. I'm kind of sad to see it taken off the map because even as I had said in our cast during the draft, I think that a team really could have gone out there and practiced it, and you could really see one team out there just dominating that map. But to Facial's point, I think it is really spammy, and I think ultimately if there was a new version maybe of it that was even a little bit bigger, so that the stick, the flag stick wasn't off the stand constantly, because it definitely the feel of it in UT 2004, in my opinion, is just way too fast paced, and UT 2004 is such a fast first person shooter as it is. So
I mean, that is an interesting point, though. There was one aspect that we took away from that, and that's Campers Crossing to some degree, and then Protrest to a large degree. It kind of takes away the wild card aspect of this. I mean, all the maps that we have left now, for better, I think, for the most part, but perhaps a little bit for the worse, is everyone's very familiar with all of them. There's not going to be any wild card maps where like a team can go out and try to develop some new strategies on. I think we pretty much have everything pretty well worn at this point. And so that certainly makes for a very even playing ground, but I also don't think we're going to see anything particularly crazy and new come out of here. You're not going to see any surprises.
Yeah, and then also what was added to the map list was Chrome. And if I'm not mistaken, I thought that there was a bigger version of Chrome way back, early U2 2004, and I actually thought it was a better version of the map. I don't know how many people agree with me on that one. Much bigger mid and whatnot. But I personally feel like Chrome is just such a cramped map. But one thing it will add to the map pool is people that are really good at pistoning and kind of cheat, what people will call cheesing across the map. It will make for, if you're playing against a team with one of those people, you'll be able to kind of keep them in their place, because that is definitely not a map that you can get across really quickly. So.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I mean, with the rule in place that each team can only pick one map once throughout the season, I think that you're going to see a lot of strategic teams pick that against teams that have very strong piston jumpers. So, for instance, the other night we played a pug against a team that had fail sauce, and I think the first map they picked was a wide open map, maybe like a Virility or a Vault City or something along those lines, and he just piston jumped the entire map away, and I think that they ended up coming out with a win. And I was a part of the other team, and we literally, spoke about it for about 3 seconds after the map, and we go, well, if we take away that ability from that team, that changes that entire dynamic for that team. So we picked Chrome, and it was a whole different game that second map. So I think you're going to see a lot of people picking that map and holding on to that map as a pick to play against a team, maybe like Linoleum's team or the team that has fail sauce on it.
And that is an interesting aspect of it, because when you think of all of the maps that have been played a lot more lately, we've been moving towards the kind of maps where the flag is off the stick a lot, and you're getting a lot of your cutoffs in mid. Not necessarily high scoring maps, but flags with a lot of grabs, where the flag is moving a lot. Like you take a map like, say, Virility, it's not necessarily always high scoring. In fact, we've seen some very low scoring games on it recently, but the flag is still relatively easy to get moving, and typically your battles come in mid about trying to get it across, as opposed to finding your way into and or out of base. I do think, though, that you're right as far as you look at Chrome, and that's sort of the opposite style. That's one where you can't just hold up that shield gun and hope to sneak around or hope to double back on the D. It's very, you're not gonna ninja run your way across Chrome. It's going to be a straight up frag fest, and it's, I think, even more so than Maul, because at least on Maul there's a couple little trick jumps you can run, right?
Yeah, and depending on which side of the map on Maul you're on, there are definitely trick jumps to run outside of just the ball jump. And another good point to a map like Chrome is that if you're playing a team with a really strong fragger in mid, let's say for instance Zelos, when you're going up, when you're playing a team like Zelos' team, they're going to pick maps that are very power up heavy, very wide open in mid, with a lot of choke points going into their base, because he's a very well known mid player, and he plays that position very well. He's a very strong fragger, very good with power up control, and if you play a map like Chrome, you're still having those two pickups in the middle, but that mid is much more cramped, and that may end up hurting his style of play as well. So that's another aspect of that to look at.
I won't ask you about your specific strategies on this, but I do find that interesting with the whole map pick strategy and aspect to it, because you have these maps like like Chrome, like Orbital 2, that can potentially help negate a team's biggest strength if, say, they're very reliant on the wide open, pistoning, cherry picking type offense. And it makes me wonder what percentage of captains are going to be picking maps based on their team's strength versus trying to negate another team's strength.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be a good mixture of both, in truth. I mean, I look at my team, not to speak specific strategies or anything, but, my team, our top 6 players that we drafted have all been, long-standing CTF players in the community. Some as far back as UT99, some, more frequently with 2003 and 2004. And we understand a lot of each other's strengths, and I like to think that because we've been around so long, we know most of the other players on the other teams, so we know a lot of their weaknesses as well. For instance, let's say we're playing Bob's team, we'll probably try to avoid a map like Grendel-Keep where there's rockets that are going to be so close to the flag when they have a defensive player like Vengeance, who's the self-proclaimed best rocket man in the game, who is just going to be hitting our flag runners with rockets all day. And likewise, if we're playing a team that has a very strong ET99 presence, teams like that have Zelos on them, or other players who have played in those UT99 days, we're going to avoid maps like a November, like a Bleak, like a what's the other? Like a Bulwark. Maps like that generally work into those guys' wheelhouse. I think that there's that. But like we were saying, on the opposite side of that spectrum, you're going to be looking for maps that you're going to play strong into. And some of that may depend on lineups, but some of that may just depend on how your team's feeling that night too.
What do you think about the map choices and the map sort of list and how that's going to affect the UT1 players? We have a good mix now. I think we have a good amount of maps that any UT1 or UT99 player can jump into and be familiar enough with to at least sort of ease their way in, because they'll be familiar with the flow of the map. We've seen, for instance, Met come in, and I've seen him play Pugs and say, I can defend on Bleak. I've done this before, and it kind of lets you slide in and negate some of the differences between the two. But how big of a factor do you think that is, or do you think that these guys are going to be active enough that it's not really going to matter by the time the season really gets going?
I think a lot of them will be active enough at the point where a lot of these matches are going. It's not going to be. It'll be pretty much a non-issue. We're seeing active pugs nightly. 3, 4, 5 pugs each night, and these guys are coming out of the woodwork to play games. I even saw Nanum in IRC the other day looking for a download link to reinstall the game. So people around, people are playing. That's for sure. But yeah, just specifically going down the map list, you've got a lot of maps that are very popular in pugs, very popular that a lot of people know, and then in my book, you've got probably maybe 2 to 3 maps that a lot of people are going to hold on to and maybe not play until the very end of the season, when it comes down to, we've already picked, our map 4 or 5 times. We need a filler map, and I see that those quote unquote filler maps, you're looking like November, you're looking at Bulwark, and you're probably looking at maybe Orbital Classic or Chrome. I didn't put Maul into that list because there are a lot of teams who may not like Maul, but they understand that there's a player on the other team who absolutely hates Maul. For instance, Lino's team with Cafe. Cafe absolutely loves Maul. That guy can just grab a flat cannon and run into that base and play defense on Maul like it's nobody's business. To that same effect, a guy like Chowie. Chowie is known for his Maul defense. If he gets back on a consistent play schedule and he's able to show up for his teams, he could also be a potential beast on defense for his team. But then you've got guys like Fusion, who is very open about the fact that he absolutely cannot stand Maul, and I am fully prepared for teams to pick Maul against us and just to try to get into his head. And if that's the case, I feel like I have a deep and versatile enough team that I can say, hey man, if you want to sit, we've got other players who want to play, or if you'd rather play defense, it's kind of one of those things. But your maps like your Grendel-Keeps, your Pistolas, your Bleaks, your Virilities, Anphrak, and Vault City, I think, will be the staples on a weekly basis. I'd like to see a clarification from Lino on the Virility. Is it the old Virility with the keg in the middle, 100 shields in the base, and the 50
Bleak.
and the 25s? Or sorry, yeah, Bleak.
I was actually asking. I was wondering the same thing. I was looking for Linoleum earlier to see if we could get him on tonight, but I don't think he's home from work yet. So we'll probably find that out later.
I can actually talk on that. I've actually talked to him directly about that. The one that we've been playing in Pugs recently is the bigger one, the newer one. The changes on that, as you were just talking about, there is a 100 in middle instead of a keg. The 25 and 50 shield both are removed, I believe. It's quite a bit bigger map. You can't do some of the pistons you could on the smaller version. But as far as I understand, I believe the bigger version will be being played.
Okay, I actually like to hear that, because I feel like the bigger one flows better, and it's definitely more balanced and not like easier, because I think that we calculated it, and it's like 2 seconds or 3 seconds for a good piston jumping flag runner to cross that mid. So yeah, and there are
those are more like Quake CTF times there.
Yeah, it's insane. Like, it's a very fast-paced map when we play that small one, and there's just so much health. and so many pickups on that map that it becomes so hard for the defense. It's an offensively stacked map, and the bigger one evens that out a little bit, which makes it more playable in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And to that point, I feel like some of the UT99 ports to 2K4, they ported him almost directly. And the problem with that is that they're so small, because you do have you're able to piston, one tap piston is 20 health versus I think the UT99 is 60 maybe, and you have a shield gun as well in 2K4. So these super small maps with the pistoning, and then there's so many vials, so many more health vials, plus 5 health each time you grab one, and it just doesn't work in 2K4 as well as some might think. And that's why you're seeing some of these smaller UT99 ports be remade. They're making them bigger. They're taking out these 25 shields and these extra 50 shields all over the place, and all the vials all over the place. So, and that's kind of what I was saying about Protrass, is I think if it was actually scaled bigger, people would like it much more.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, without getting this, I mean, people argue about this detail all the time, but I mean, I do think that one aspect that's a little bit underrated is, people talk about the scale of ports coming to 2K4. I don't think it's just like the scale in and of itself. It's specifically the fact that you need to make it bigger to account for the fact that it's frankly easier to piston a further distance while taking less damage. Just the fact, like you said, it's 20 health for a tap, which takes you a good amount of the distance that you could get from a full charge. Not to mention, you have a shield. And so it just takes longer. Even if a flag carrier is just running by himself with the shield, he's going to last at least 5-10 seconds. Well, you have to take into account that without making the map so big and wide open that it just becomes purely hit scan. And I think that's the trick to it, is I think the ports that we're going to see do well and the new maps that we try that are going to do better are the ones that have complexity to it, so that you can't just piston in a straight line across the map, but that way you also don't rely on making it big, wide open rooms in order to make it take longer to, get around. And I think those are the ones that we'll probably see the most success on.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
And one other thing I was going to bring up while we're talking about maps is I've heard, even just tonight, Zeos was talking about perhaps having Citadel added to the map list, and I know many people do not like it these days, but it used to be played all the time. I think it works really well for UT 2004, and I personally hope to see it added to the map list. I think that there's a few different teams that would really be really good at it.
I know Killer loves it, and he would try to pick it on a regular basis, or obviously the one time that he'd be able to play it.
So he would tell you to pick it every single match.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, yeah, I would agree that it's a big enough map, and that it used to be played all the time, and there are a lot of pluses and minuses to that map. That it's with the power-ups and things of that nature, it is a very quote-unquote offensively stacked map with the number of vials and pickups, but on the reverse of that, there are no borders on the map, so you can easily just take a shock rifle and push flag runners off of the edge of the map, which obviously kills them, which negates all of those pickups. So there's a nice balance there. It's not like a Bleak where there are so many pickups and so many vials, but there's no environmental way to kill them outside of just shooting them with as much ammo as you possibly can pick up.
Yeah, no environmental VFG, essentially.
I think you people need help and need to seek medical attention immediately. Whatever the opposite of in love is, that's what I am. I've always had a hate relationship with Citadel. I hate it, and it hates me. And you can watch any of my demos or any of my screenshots you've ever seen me play on Citadel, and you'll understand. But I'm not playing this season, so it's a tough map to cast, but it's definitely an exciting map to cast. We'll see what happens with it. I don't have to play it either way, so I'm kind of fine no matter what. But if I did have to play it, I would probably end up just playing Shield Gun D on the flag. It's probably my favorite position on it.
Yeah, I personally like the Rocket D. Just sitting there, grab ammo all day, and rocket people coming down the hole.
Yeah, it's very effective. I distinctly remember back when 2K4 was a little bit more alive, and Clan 9 from Outer Space, that was their one map pick, and having to play defense against those guys as they were just leaving locator discs behind the base, capping, and then picking back up again 3 seconds later was a very frustrating time.
So actually, one thing I wanted to ask you about, Facial, going back to the map picks, and this is kind of what I was sort of slowly making my way towards getting at, is if we see a team display a given weakness on a map, like that's kind of what I'm curious to see is on these maps that aren't like locks. Like we can probably name 5 or so maps that every team is pretty much going to pick at some point, just because they're the most actively played maps. At some point, a team's going to have to venture outside its comfort zone, and if we see that happen early, like say we see a team pick, I don't know, Orbital 2 against a team like to try to negate a piston-heavy team, and we see it work really, really well. I mean, we could potentially see multiple teams pick the same map against them. We could see a team have to really shore up that weakness in a hurry if teams find out that they have a real Achilles heel.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us expect to see that happen, honestly. I think that a lot of, I like to think that most players are pretty active, and most players have a pretty good understanding of who either excels at some maps or who necessarily doesn't. And a lot of that also could come down to rosters on a regular basis. I mean, I think we've all seen pugs where specific flag runners, I think Lino is a prime example of this, on a map, let's say like Pistola, that has kind of an open flag room with a lot of ways to exit it. If he gets a cherry pick, he can easily hide inside that base,